Thank you so much. I love our connection. It is always remarkable what a small world it is for all of us. There's always just a few degrees of separation.
I know. And it was joyful reading the book, and I was like, she talked about water. So you have those connections. And bigger than that, I'm from Nashville as well. So just reading about, and I've never been able to eloquently explain to people what Nashville used to be. So post, pre-Tennessee Titans and the Nashville Predators, it wasn't that. And it was a city separated by the North and the South, and you so eloquently described our experience. So if you have not had an opportunity to read Emily's book, we're going to try to unpack it as much as possible. You all know that I'm a reader. For those who have been to a Wine Words event before, you know I'm a reader. So I won't spoil things for you, but just to have enough for you to understand why we love this book so much. So Emily's life is very interesting, and I found it a unique space in literature for this book because we always read about, or even in media, we see the duality of the Black experience where you have to code switch for corporate America, and then you go to your Black community with your Black family and you're living your Black life, or you are stereotypical hood in your Black experience and get thrown into a very white world where you have to figure out and fumble. And so those seem to be very common themes in our culture as far as what's getting published and what's being read. Your experience is very different. You have a very firm, strong African American heritage that you know about. It's not like it was a secret. You've generations know of your history of your family, and you selected going up north, and you picked your environment. And what came across is you write in an unapologetic way about your experience, where I feel some authors feel burdened to kind of explain or over-explain, and then I was like, well, maybe that's not true for her. Maybe you do have the burden, you just didn't write from that perspective. So,
well, I love everything you're saying, and I was very conscious as I was putting this book together. So I started the book just a series of independent essays. I really didn't think of myself as writing a book. And the first essay that I wrote that became part of this collection was an essay called Teaching the N-Word, which I wrote in response to a class I was teaching at UVM. It was me in a classroom full of 10 lovely white students. And we were teaching African American autobiography. So the ironies just began, the first day. And, the word comes up in our reading. And I just decided that I was going to write about the experience as it was. And I wasn't going to give a lecture about it because, what happens, of course, in our culture is that some white person says the word and then, goes on Oprah or an equivalent and a grand mea culpa, I'll never do it again.
Right.
I'm not a racist. Right. And that person may or may not get their career back.
Right.
And then it happens again, And so there's a way that the lectures just aren't working. And I was really interested then in the kind of question of what is so compelling about that word.
Right.
And so I decided, when I very much think of myself as a teacher, but in the classroom, and I teach at the University of Vermont, so my students come in, I have, I'm lucky if I get 4 or 5 students of color.
I love how you say, I may be the first Black teacher they've ever had.
Some of them, I tell a story in here about I had a white student who had never talked to a Black person before. She was in my class, but when she came to UVM, she fell in with this really fantastic, vibrant group of young Black women who thought of her like this, like she was a unicorn.
Right.
It's like, how is that possible? So when she was in my class, they would prompted her to tell the story because I thought it was hilarious.
Right.
And she said that she'd seen a Black man once at a bus station stop, and she wanted to speak to him, but there was no ruse,
Right.
So anyway, so that was a long time ago, but I'm very aware. That's the story of higher education in this country. It becomes more and more expensive and more exclusive, In some variety, we're dealing with that. So I'm always very conscious of what I represent to the students, and I write about that too, the way I dress, in that essay that, I never come to class in jeans, that's just not, that's not something I would ever do, because when I am in that classroom, I realize what I'm and the kind of I'm in there thinking of my grandmother and my great grandmother and what it means for them, for me to be in that room.
Right.
But when I go into the class, the students start sometimes below zero, so I have to tell them things. I'm starting with the tradition, and I'm ending up, and they have to come out with some knowledge. But the essay form for me, or me as the writer, I get to meander and I get to contradict myself. And so even in the essay, the structure, I wanted there to be gaps, because I said, I'm not going to give you a lecture, because again, the lecture is not working.
Yes.
The short answer is no, don't say it.
Yeah.
Because
right.
I have enough of a reputation at my school now that the students don't come to me and ask that question, like they know what I'm going to say.
Right.
I'll say, and I'll say to my students of color too, say what you like, but know that no one was ever lynched being called Mr. Johnson.
Right.
Right. So that's the history that word carries.
Right.
And for, I have students, well, I'm not responsible. Well, we're all responsible for history. History made us. We don't get to decide, what part we want, what part we don't want. And I'll also say, sure, language is elastic, and I would never tell someone what to say. But as my grandmother would say, don't write a check with your mouth that your behind can't cash.
Yes.
So there are consequences to what you say. Now go forth.
Right.
Go to the world.
Right. But you've been warned. You have been warned.
And I
love how you made your class everyone's class, because so many times when you get titles of African American literature, it's like, oh, this is the Black people's class, or the Hispanic diaspora, oh, this is only for Latinos, when it's an American story. And in order for your students who may not be of color to connect with the story, they have to own it, own the responsibility of it's a part of their telling as well.
And I think it's a delicate thing, because I always tell my students, if they come in and say things like that, white students, well, I don't understand this, I don't understand, how can I understand Frederick Douglass? And I'll say, well, I was never a slave in the 19th century. So this experience, I don't carry it, but at the same time I do, so, but the essay is really that question, like, I am a human being, and I'm a Black human being, and I'm a woman, and I bring that with me everywhere I go, but I'm also a teacher, and you are not entitled to my personal experience. And in some ways the book, what you were saying at the beginning is exactly the dilemma I had, and I think it took me a long time, because I love that you see this. I think of my experience in some ways as, an African American is not as sort of typical,
right?
In that we live race, as you say, it's always shifting, right? It's never exactly. We're not living Blackness in capital letters all the time.
Right.
Sometimes we're living in other ways.
Right.
We're just trying to go to the bank.
Right.
And,
right.
My friend, I have a woman that is my kind of a mentor. She says, I just went out of the race business. I'm on vacation. Race fatigue.
Right.
So, but I wanted to tell that story, and I think I internalized in some ways that mandate, or what you're talking about, the ways that our stories are often they have become so public.
Yes.
And
yes.
I also am suspicious sometimes of the publishing industry.
Yes.
Because you wonder, what kind of stories are people investing in?
Yes.
And to what degree are our struggles becoming literally something people want to consume?
Yes.
And with every video we can see now, sometimes I reflect on that. It just what does it mean that we can watch someone being killed in real time?
As it's happening.
Yes. And on one hand, I think about, Emmett Till's mother, who insisted that the world witness, her son's bloated, battered body, and said, you must witness this.
Right.
And how it started a movement, really. On the other hand, I think, again, is somewhat, who's watching these videos just like pulling up with a bowl of popcorn?
Right.
And saying, let me watch this.
As if it was fiction.
As if right. And it just like, kind of thrilling story.
Right.
So, and I just one story. But it kind of kept me questioning about what my book would contribute. Because the stories of the struggles are important, and I didn't experience the things that we often see out there. I thought, is my story
right?
Is it black? Is it even black?
Right.
Right.
You know what I'm
saying?
Right.
Is it doing that work? Which is, to intervene. But then,
it's so very black, and that's what I love about it, is because you don't apologize for, you didn't grow up in the hood, you didn't have to strive and overcome, and not that those stories are insignificant.
Right.
It's just that we're not monolithic in that way. And so if there isn't a space for your story,
Right.
then what is the space about? And I actually wrote, I said, it's unique because we all know the person who's the black woman in the room, but we've never read that story.
I like that.
And we don't know what it's like for you to travel in that sphere all the time.
Yeah.
So it's easy because you write about people popping into your life and making assumptions about it, like because you're married to a white man, and so they make this assumption of what type of black you have to be
Right.
to marry outside of your race, or what type of black you have to be to live in Vermont, and they're so very wrong. And but I mean we are full of assumptions about people, and so when you contrast that with the grace in which you accept it, because my head would have spun around like a couple of times in this book, but you have such wonderful grace for people and their questions and their curiosity, and the courage to write this part of the story, the African American story, because I think people take for granted, I think non-blacks take for granted the black person in the room as being comfortable.
Yes, I agree.
All the time.
All the time. They have no idea about our interior experience. I
Yeah.
agree. And I like that, so you're right, interracial marriage, and I wanted to write an essay that, responded to, and in the essay, literally, a friend of mine who is Mexican American, I hope I didn't out her. I think I called something else. Asked me once, recently, like, what is it like being married to a white man? And it was just kind of extraordinary question because at the time, my husband, we were trying to exchange keys to get the kids. It's like,
Right.
well, I mean, it's like being married to somebody who has my key. I'm like, I can't.
Right.
But also, I think with people, again, the assumptions. The assumption was one that his family was the one who had to be won over. But in fact, it was my family.
Right.
I had to, my aunts and my uncles had to be like,
Your dad is my dad. Because
Right.
I was in love with Duran Duran, and I kept saying to my dad, I'm marrying Simon Le Bon, I'm bringing him home, get ready for our British babies. And my daddy was like, nope,
Yep.
that's not why I had you. You are not married outside of your race. And it took a while of, Daddy, just listen to Duran Duran. You're going to love him. And that's a comical view, but
Yeah.
I had those conversations.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, the same thing with and I write about this, my beloved father, who, very old school, very, West Indian patriarch, and my daughter is going to do this, and she's going to do this, and, I got old.
Yeah.
And he was like, just please marry someone.
Right.
Different
set of concerns.
He found something with my husband, his Italianness. He said,
Right.
And the food. So that's what really.
Yes.
But people, again, the assumptions. My husband, in some ways, our biggest issue is class, which I don't know if I explained, because my husband's family, they immigrants, and they didn't go beyond the 8th grade. My parents went to Meharry.
Yeah.
And so that's also,
Yeah.
that's our story,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Two-parent home with
Right.
the parent, this kind of thing.
Forever two-parent home.
That is
Yes.
our story.
Yes.
And so, again, I am amused sometimes by the assumptions
Yes.
because, if anything, our class differences sometimes surprise me because it's something, I don't think about.
Right.
But my husband, even recently, my daughter's, I went to take him to the doctor. He's like, you're always going to the doctor. And I said, my father was a doctor.
Right.
They're at our disposal.
Right.
So for him, going to the doctor,
It's a big
imagine
thing.
for your father who did not speak English well, had a 3rd grade education, it was a big deal, but
Right.
it's not, So it's interesting to me how we relate as
Right.
individuals, and then even more broadly,
Right.
the ways that race can appear and reappear in a relationship.
Right.
Sometimes it can be defining, and sometimes it can just recede.
Right. Right.
And even with my children, we adopted our daughters. They're born in Ethiopia. And watching them evolve, which is a huge reason I wrote the book, because
Right.
I was so interested, the stories I carry from my ancestors, they're so alive, right, for so many of us. I mean, in the course of thinking about this book, I thought, there's stories about my grandparents' marriage that I tell that feel fundamental to me about who I am and the choices, but I wasn't there.
Right.
Right. So They don't really. It's just my imagination.
Right.
But now as my kids get older and they start
If
to
you
tell
see the-
stories,
yes.
like thinking, oh, that's what
Yes.
they're picking from.
Yes.
To say, well, this is why I do what I do because it's different than my mother.
Right.
And also watching them experience blackness.
Yes.
I grew up in a home. My parents, would say, my mother was, and I would say, Mom, not everything is about race. And now I find myself. My daughters have to bite my tongue sometimes because they'll say something happened at school, and I'll say, "Oh, really? Who's that teacher again? What does she look like?"
Right.
And so, kind of, and I'm there and
Right.
trying to. Recently, I just have to tell a story. My daughters, so watching them now, they're 13, and so they're a lot older than.
Right. And they're twins.
And they're
girls,
twins.
Yeah.
So my daughter was in, and thinking about race in Vermont, was in Old Navy. And she called me. She was with a girlfriend who was biracial, very light skinned, and in fact had her hair blonde at some point. They were good, really good friends. And I always think of this girl as black. Even
Right.
though, we've never talked about it, but I always think of her that way. So they were in Old Navy, and my daughter Isabella was, they have those. You're checking out all the perfumes. So
Yes.
her friend Olivia was spraying, fooling around there, 13, and a white woman behind her said to my daughter, who's very brown-skinned, and said, if you're not going to buy that, please stop spraying it. So my daughter said, well, I wasn't even spraying it. But, of course, she calls me. And she said, Mommy, this happened to me. And my first response was, is she still in the store?
Right.
Because I can be there.
Right. Right.
So I have a fantasy like a store. But her response was, she said to me immediately, because I always will say to them, I've got my back.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And she said, Mommy, I don't want you to go around scaring people. And I thought to myself, though, what am I bringing with me to these experiences, right?
Right.
My history.
Right.
And she wanted a chance to figure out for herself. And she said, do you think that she spoke to me this way because my skin is brown? And I said, this woman sounds like a miserable person. And, she said the daughter had looked sympathetic. I said, yeah, you're right. I said, here's one thing I'm going to tell you. Don't ever question yourself. Because, isn't that, I think
advice.
sometimes we are told, are you sure? We
Right.
internalize that, right? Am I sure? And that
Right.
is, of course, the experience, I think, of living in our bodies, that you never really know why. But I thought, that's what I want, even if they kind of have to shoot first and take names later.
Yes.
I want
Yes.
them to feel confident that their reading of the situation
Yes.
is correct. Because I don't want them to have, it's too hard already growing up hyper visible in these spaces. And we revisit it all the time. Like, they're like, what are we doing here? So we'll talk about that. And I always have an eye, frankly, on the door.
Right.
Because I don't want them to, I want
Right.
them to live full lives. I mean,
Right.
right now, what we're doing is traveling a lot, and for me, it is simply, I want them to be around, particularly black women.
Right.
And
Right.
now, 13, all the hair issues coming up. It's like, let's go to Brooklyn and let's sit in the park,
Yep. Yep.
and let's just experience this and hopefully just like fill our tanks,
Yes.
and then we'll have other experiences.
And the reservoir can last,
Yes.
for a minute if you
That's
get
right.
enough of it. So she touched on her daughters, and we're going to unpack motherhood because that was such an integral part. And so the title Black is the Body, I don't want to miss the elephant that's in the room. So you open with a tragic attack that happened to you.
That's right.
And how it changed your body.
That's right.
I was not aware of the story, but it deeply moved me in the sense of what it feels like for someone to be hurt by someone you don't know, like just an attack for no reason and random. And the attack happened in a coffee shop, so it was multiple people involved. And the gentleman, had other concerns that were happening, but just that it was you, and that you found. And when I say that it's you, because it never is personal until you know someone.
That's right.
It's always touching and emotional when you hear these stories, but like the massacre that happened in South Carolina, one of the women that passed was my classmate's grandmother. That's personal. And that's different than even as emotionally charged it was, it made it my story. Like I got in a car and I had to go to South Carolina, like it made it my story. And it's similar hearing your story. It's random acts of violence happen all the time, but how up close this was, because it was personal. Like it, I know you didn't know the gentleman, but just that it was an attack that was right here, not distant, not with a gun, but with a knife so close to you. So I don't want to tell the entire story because, again, this is stuff that you want to read for yourself. But it allowed me to understand the title in a different perspective. Yeah. And the race of your attacker, he was white, but it was inconsequential to the identity of all the people that were attacked, right? Because you weren't the only one. Yeah. But the doctor story.
Yeah, that's the hardest part of the story. Should I just?
Yes, I think you. Yeah. You have to tell that part.
Well, because I know. Yeah, so it's very alarming, but it's just fundamental in some ways to who I am as an adult. But I was in a coffee shop in 1994 in New Haven, Connecticut, and there was a white man. He was a paranoid schizophrenic, and he was in the coffee shop at the same time I was, and he stabbed 7 people. So I tell the story of what happened, and I use it to frame the book for a lot of reasons. Mm-hmm. I wanted to talk about, frankly, in some ways, this is sort of my deepest wound, very literally, and I wanted to share that with the reader because I thought, I want this book to be an intimate experience, and I want it to be an experience that you can come into and feel like, okay, I'm going to put down my guard, and I'm going to receive this. Mm-hmm. Because I thought if I shared this, then maybe the reader could understand that I just want us to be together on this journey,
right.
But it was shaping for me because, it was a completely random attack, and the guy, he was not on his medication. He thought that his mother, that one of the people in the shop had killed his mother. He was having, I was an afterthought. Really, he was focused on a few people.
Right.
But unfortunately, I sustained wounds that keep kind of reoccurring. I have, some of you know, adhesions in my bowel. So, I scar tissue and intestines get tangled up. Mm-hmm. And I've been fortunate the last 2 times I've had to go to the hospital that I haven't had to have more surgery because that can create more adhesions. And one of my surgeons told me, you're just unlucky. This doesn't happen to everyone. Many people have surgery and then they're done.
Right.
But that's what I've carried with me. And you're right, the guy was, we had no connection. And when I looked into his eyes, I looked into the eyes of someone who was not home. Mm-hmm. There was no one there. And I don't know, I don't know what it's like to be attacked like that by somebody that you do know, but it was a certain kind of experience to know that your life was in the hands of somebody who was just not home,
Right.
But I did, so I always say that the worst part of the story that stays with me, and I mean this, it was worse than being attacked by the stranger. I had a surgeon who, the night of my surgery, so excuse me, and trigger warning, but I'm lying on the gurney, and he came over and he plunged his fingers into my wound, white surgeon, and I instinctively grabbed his hand, and he said, "Don't grab my hand." And I was terrified. I was so much more terrified than I was when I was by the stranger. Mm-hmm. And the nurses around him, I could tell they themselves trying to keep everything still because this guy was. And later when I spoke to another surgeon about it, this guy who was very nice, another white surgeon, and I think he said more than he meant to say, but he said, well, this guy, these surgeons, it's New Haven. And they encounter a lot of gunshot victims, a lot of stabbing victims, and what I was getting was a lot of brown bodies here, and so assumptions about that, and
about
dehumanization.
The yes.
And when you know when it's happening for you, and you know that particular kind of vulnerability, and we know the studies now that we are more vulnerable in the medical establishment because there's an assumption we don't experience pain in the same way, literally.
Right.
So I always, when I'm in the hospital, I always told people, I'm a 10,
right.
And I will call all of my friends in the medical community, from Vermont again, they're white, and say, I'm in the hospital, somebody comes to mess with me,
right.
to come and be by my bedside, so they will see me as human.
Right.
Unfortunately,
And being the daughter of a doctor, you know the difference in
exactly.
the type of care you're supposed to receive.
Right, and I know how to talk. So I will sometimes say that first. My father is a physician.
Right.
Right. And you think about the scores of people who don't have that. You know, but it was a very and I wrote about this because also thinking about learning to live with that wound, which is what I've had to do.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen. I gave a reading, and a woman said to me, she thinks about the things that happened in her life to her and the things that happened for her.
Oh, wow.
And there's nothing good about being stabbed.
Right.
But I've had to learn about my vulnerability as a human being, and how little control I have. I mean, even I finished the book and, it was happening every 7 years. And I'll be honest, there's something almost comforting in the biblical significance.
Yes.
A lot of seven happened on August 7th. I was 27. There were 7 of us.
Wow.
And every 7 years, I was having these adhesions. And we passed the 7-year mark. My husband and I were like high-fiving each other. And I really thought, I wrote this out of my body.
Wow.
And I was wrong. And 3 weeks after the book was turned in, back in another gurney.
Wow.
And I'm such a good talker. I convinced my first surgeon that I just didn't want it to be true.
Right.
And in the essay I talk about my stubbornness, that stubborn lucidity and stubbornness. And I said this is not adhesions at all. My husband's like, please reason with my crazy wife. I know what this is. I can't believe this. Right. But I went home, and then of course I had to go back to the hospital.
Right.
But it was another lesson in how we just have to learn to work with these things. And I think that's how the blues were born.
Right.
With like people say, I'm taking this experience and I'm going to make art out of it.
Yes.
Not in a way of erasing the experience,
Yes.
but saying I'm not going to let it defeat me. I'm going to find a way to use it and to make it useful.
And you intertwine the usefulness of the experience not only with the essay that you wrote, but also in your encounters with others, because I think when the roles are reversed racially and a white person is attacked by a black person, if anger exists way afterwards, it's almost excused. It's like, oh yeah, we understand why you hate black people because you were attacked by a black person, but you are very conscious of putting it in a space where it was an incident that was unfortunate, but it happened, and it doesn't. You don't attack your students. You don't attack everybody that's in Vermont. Like it was an unfortunate incident, and that's the type of care that you give as a teacher. It seems like just being able to cultivate that these are incidents that happen. These are moments and spots in time and in history that we have to look at, examine, and leave it where it is, and then look at how it can almost leave its residue on other things that happen. So
I hear you.
I'm very grateful for that type of. I had an editor at Essence that said that the best memoir bleeds on a page, and just for that type of candor that you gave, because I think that people will identify with your experience in one way or the other. I want to talk about the twins.
Okay.
Yes. And motherhood in general. So Black as a Body is a generational story. You talk about your grandmother, your mother, yourself, your babies. And your stories of Mississippi are so Southern, right? Like the whole family feast, the food on the table, the gathering of bodies, the gathering of the long history of things, like so-and-so is mad at so-and-so, and you have to not talk to this person and not talk to that person, and did you eat before you got here? I hope you didn't eat before you got here because so-and-so made all this food, and you're expected. Like, it was so quintessential, and I am jealous of how you were able to frame everything, especially with the conversations with aunties and uncles and that whole Southern experience. It's unique also that you can look at it with a Northern lens because you've spent so much time up north now and looking at it from when you were in it, submerged in it as a child, and having to spend summers in the South, and then just being able to. And most of your trips that you talk about in the book are for bad occasions, for mournful occasions. But you know how family is. You're there for a funeral and it turns into a family reunion at some point. And the stories of your grandmother were hilarious. Like, she is one of those characters that you can't make up. You cannot make up. And then the discussions that you all had, even as an adult, was like, who is this woman? like, do you know my credentials? And I'm talking about this. And she's like, I don't care what you're saying. I got to live here all the time.
Right.
But the fact that you did that research and you did that history, and how your mother's story was so very different from her mother's story. And you are continuing to write a different story for yourself. And then, as you call your twins, so very Vermont, right? So
That's true.
Ethiopian Vermont children, right? So they have this unique spin on their brownness as well. So what do you feel motherhood has added to the lens?
Wow. I love that question. First of all, I love saying you're jealous is the highest compliment. Thank you.
I was like, that's how you write that? Oh my God, I've been feeling that. That's what that looks like on paper. Yeah.
Well, I think the question that I was really chasing in this book is, where do we belong? Where do I belong? And I've long been interested in even just the term African American and what it represents for us in terms of and kind of aspiration. And I've told my husband, we're going to Italy in a few weeks, and we're going to see his ancestors. We're going to see these people. It's like I envy that.
Yeah.
And I do know, and now we have ways to find out where we are from and to whom we belong. But, we don't have, so much was lost in the Middle Passage,
Yes.
and that's something I think we mourn and we long for.
Yes.
Where are the stories? Where are the archives? It's just, you're struck by it so often. And in some ways, that's what the book is for. I like the idea of us being a story keeper.
Yes.
I feel like that's what I am really.
Yes.
And the question of belonging with my daughters, they are of so many places.
Yes.
And I have
They
a story
seem
in
very
there.
precocious
yeah.
too, right?
Well, my daughter Isabella at some point said a classmate was trying to figure out what to call her, because the African Children's Choir would come to Burlington, and they went to, and she said, the little girl, and this is third grade, said, well, you're African American. And my daughter said, no, I'm an African who lives in America. And all
Which
of
is
8 years
true.
old.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I did not think of myself as such clear terms.
Right.
She said, while the law may state that I'm an American, I'm an African. And I love that. And I'll tell them, I envy that.
Yeah.
You belong somewhere. We go to D.C. and people recognize them. We, especially when they were little, we'd go to a hotel and people would be speaking to them and to Grinia and zipping their coats, and like, what is that like?
Right.
You the map of Ethiopia is on your face.
Yes.
And I so cherish that for them. And of course now they are, 13 years old and they just, all they care about are, their iPhones and
Right.
I don't even know. But I always keep it tucked here, and always, taking out the, all the picture books and saying, what a journey you have in front of you.
Right.
But I tell the story about going to Ethiopia to, make that big journey to bring them home. And I honestly, I think, because my father's from Trinidad and there's that kind of immediate thing in the family and all that negotiation. And I think of myself so much as my mother's child and from that South, that, when I go home, the way I talk, the way I dress, I'm not really recognizable, but it's so much in me, and it's a place I claim and feel, Hazelhurst.
Yeah.
It just, when I go down there, and I used to always tell my mother I envied because people could look at her and see who she belonged to.
Right.
It was just so clear. And of course, as a child, she hated that.
Right.
She wanted to get out.
Right.
But to me, I think, I tell also, I'm sorry, I'm rambling, but my father, who, my father fell in love with blackness. We came to Tennessee in the 50s, and everything was happening. And we had some great conversations before he passed away about what it was like to be at Fisk in the 50s.
Yes.
And he said, Emily, the courage of these students, and he would try, you see the pictures.
Right.
He would explain to me, do you understand people were putting out cigarettes on their skin? And he said, I couldn't participate because I was an immigrant. I was afraid of, being sent back. But, there's that larger purpose, sending money back home, and that was what he was answerable to.
Right.
But black was who he was. But American, not really. He never really saw that, I think that's not uncommon, right? He came to this country for a purpose.
Right.
And I always thought that was so interesting,
Mm-hmm.
that blackness was a country in some ways for him. And it was different from some of his
Wow.
relatives. And we know about the tensions with Caribbean Americans
Right.
and African Americans, but he was black, and he
Yeah.
claimed that. But American is not so much. And with my daughters, definitely I'm always thinking, what are they in their bodies? I mean, now they will, it's 60 degrees. My daughter's saying, "Can I wear shorts to school?" No. And then she made an argument recently that it was sexist of me because there's some boys. She interviewed the boys in her class, and their mothers didn't
Not
care.
sexist.
Why should I care? And I thought, well, okay, go to,
Be cold.
get cold and wear their coat. But they literally, they were born near the hottest spot on earth.
Right.
And they are comfortable in that kind of weather. But as I said, as they get older, I mean, the kind of racial climate of Vermont, they are becoming more. But I watch them making choices. My daughter Julia, at this point in her life, and this may change, has decided that what she is a race rebel.
Oh.
So she corrects, she takes great pleasure in correcting not only her peers, but her teachers. And I'm watching, but she will tell them, that is incorrect.
Right.
That's not how it was.
She has become an outside agitator.
She likes it.
Yeah.
That's what she is. And she takes, and sometimes she comes with me on the road when she does, and she'll
Right.
talk to people about,
Right.
no, you can't touch my hair, and this is why. Whereas my daughter Isabella is definitely going through a lot of feelings of otherness, and feeling, and I'm watching her negotiate that.
Right.
And, the question of where they belong, remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But Warren said to me years ago, he said, I think you are somebody who's found comfort in your discomfort. It was actually really helpful.
Wow.
I kind of was
Right.
like, wow, maybe that's who I am.
Well, you've made a career out
And
of it.
then I decided I'm going to do this.
Right.
And so when someone, what is it like? Well, I don't know, this book would not exist
Right.
if not for the experience of alienation, honestly.
Right.
And
Right.
wanting to, need to narrate that in a way of
But being
owning
able
it.
to articulate it, because I think people walk in it all the time
You're
and
right.
don't feel as if the story has value to be said out loud. I think people are uncomfortable all the time, but they never say this story is important enough to share. And you can have discourse with friends and family and that sort of thing, but to a larger audience to say, this is my ordinary life, and this is why it's extraordinary.
Thank you for
And
that.
that is one of the many reasons I love
Thank
this
you
book.
very much.
And this is so, the people who've been to Wine Words know I'm a little nerd. So not only did I read the book, I listened to the audiobook. So I got you twice. And Emily reads the audiobook. So if you just want that type of intimate experience, I definitely recommend it. I'm hogging your time, so I'm going to let you read. We'll ask questions if there are any questions for the audience, and allow time for signatures afterwards. While you're finding your passage, what are you reading now?
Oh, wow, what a great question. What am I reading now? I'm reading actually what I've got on my bookshelf.
Mm-hmm.
I'm reading,
Or plan to read?
There's
Yeah.
a book by, I don't know how to pronounce it, so forgive me if I mispronounce his name, but there's a young Vietnamese American poet called Ocean Vuong,
Mm-hmm.
Vuong, and I loved his book, his first book, and he has a book now called On Earth We Are Briefly Gorgeous.
Oh wow.
And I really love his work. The poet Morgan Parker, I think her name is, and her book "There Are Things More Beautiful Than Beyonce."
Ah.
I really recommend. I read the book a lot. I called it to my daughter.
Yes.
And they are by turns funny and searing. I just really love her work.
Okay.
A memoir called Heavy, and I also can't
Ah,
pronounce
is
the
that-
author's name. Kiese?
Yes.
Yeah, Kiese Lehman, or
Yes.
Anyway, his first book, How to Kill Yourself Slowly in America. It's a collection of essays, and they rocked me when I read it. I just love his mind and his form.
Love it.
There's a memoir called Devotion by a writer, Danny Shapiro.
Okay.
And it's getting a lot of play, so I'm going to tuck into that one again.
Okay.
There's also a book, I've got too many.
No. Look, I can write fast. We got a whole summer to read.
All right.
So, and we do a challenge called 30 Books in 90 Days.
Oh.
So,
Okay.
yeah, I'm adding to the list.
Okay, so the book I would recommend is a book called Never Caught.
Huh.
And it's a story about
The George Washington slave that ran away, and
Never got-
they kept trying to get her back. Yes, I have that on my shelf.
I think she made it to Philadelphia and was the subject of a newspaper article.
Right.
About, her, it's really.
And even
great.
after Washington died, his wife kept trying to get her
her
back,
home.
and she was like, "I'm not going."
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yes.
So I love that story.
Yeah.
I think we, sometimes we need those stories.
Yes, we do. The heroine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And whoever hasn't read Brian Stevenson's book, what is the name of it?
Just Mercy.
Just Mercy.
And what a book, and you will cry.
It's heart-wrenching.
It is heart-wrenching.
I think I got halfway through and was too angry to exist. Like, it's almost like binge watching Game of Thrones, and you feel like you want to kill everybody for a second.
Yeah.
So you have to take a step back, and like you can't engulf yourself. His language is beautiful. The way it's written, the stories are heart-wrenching.
They are.
Yeah.
I thought a lot about reading that book about the challenges of telling those stories.
Mm-hmm.
Because I thought you have to tell them in a way that will keep the reader engaged.
Yes.
And I don't know if anybody's streamed When They See Us
Yeah.
yet. And I've just been reading a lot. We must see it, right?
Right. I
And I
couldn't
have to
make
get
it through the
myself-
first episode.
okay.
I really, I
Yeah,
need to be
I'm ready.
alone for days to kind of just, because I was alive during that process, but I don't think I was old enough to really understand all of the things that I'm now getting a glimpse of through this camera lens.
Right.
And so, I think I was at minute 38, and I just had to walk away because it was too emotional. And I am going to, it's almost like when we all had to watch Roots, right?
Right.
Like, you have to watch what's happening.
Yes.
But in a way that wasn't Roots, because Roots didn't feel true. It was, but we know that Alex had to fictionalize a lot of things because, he didn't even have access to the internet like we have now. So how did he know all of these details? So he's filling all of those spaces up with something else. But these people are still alive and here, and yes, I was angry.
Yeah, I can understand.
Yeah.
I'm trying to now decide about watching it with my daughters. Because again, at this kind of moment in their lives, and that's a question actually, in the book. I think, what kind of things do we share with our children? And something happened last summer. I'm sure we all remember. And it's so funny to tell these stories in different venues because we consume different news.
Right.
And not to make it so absolute, but I'll tell this story. I'm going to tell with white audiences, and a lot of times people won't know. But you remember last year? I think it was last year when a young boy, black boy, not more than 11, 12, in a suburb outside of Detroit. He got off at the wrong bus stop and he couldn't find his way. And so he knocked on a door of someone who was basically a neighbor, and the one woman who was white went to the door, screamed, and the husband got a gun, shot at him. And when I told this story to my students, I'll say, did not hit him, and that is how low the bar is.
Right.
Right?
Right.
You say, thankfully, he
He's
didn't
alive.
hit him.
Right.
And just of course being a parent, I guess you don't have to be a parent to imagine this kid terrified and afraid and crouching, and not be able to rely on an adult to do a decent
to help.
thing.
Mhm.
I'm not even. And so around the same time, my daughter, we just had moved in a new neighborhood, and our dog got out. We had a new dog, so we were learning to be dog people, and our dog kept getting out, and it was actually a really useful way to get to know neighbors.
Right.
Kept bringing it back.
Right.
So at some point, though, my daughter called me. I was in the library, and the dog got out, and someone called and said, I have the dog, but I have to go back to work, and who can?
Right.
So I said to Julia, you have to go get Sammy. And we were hastily making the arrangements. And as soon as she hung up, I realized, one, she didn't have a phone yet, and two, I forgot to tell her to bring a leash. So I'm sitting by the phone, panicked. This it was after that piece of news. And I got a call from a woman, presumably white, who now I know is white. And she said, I've got your daughter, I've got Sammy, everything's okay, do you want to talk to her? And she understood, she anticipated my level of panic.
Right.
So everybody got home, everybody was safe, and I sat Julia down, and I told her what happened, and
Right.
and she said, well, did it happen in Vermont? And I said, no, but I can't guarantee that it won't. I cannot guarantee that.
Right.
I said, look, I'll tell you what, I want you to believe in the world.
Right.
I want you to believe in the world and that there are good people in the world. But these things happen, and I want you to be alive.
You have to be aware.
And I want you to be safe.
Right.
So that isn't that the dilemma? Like, I can't keep it in my pocket all day.
Yeah.
That's not good for them. And I say this in an essay that
when you discover you're black and how to maneuver
how
in the world.
vulnerable. And, it's like there's no playbook.
Yeah.
We all try it. We all try the respectability politics. And, we try to, say, well, do this and be respectful of the police officer. And we know it doesn't work all the time.
Right.
And that we are vulnerable to the caprice, literally, of these people with guns.
Right. Sanctioned.
Right.
Yes.
And so, but how do we teach our kids to love the world?
Right.
And to believe and have faith? I mean, it's a daily trick, daily balance.
Right.
I don't know. This is also strange. I don't know if anyone feels. I've been thinking about this recently. Again, thinking about the vulnerability in my children, and always, they literally leave the house, and I think. Sometimes you think, are they going to come home?
Right.
And I want them to play in the neighborhood, but I'm always kind of watching.
Right.
And I think, God, is the experience of black parents that, you work hard and you have the credentials and you have the job and you get this and that. And I think at any moment this could just disappear.
All the way.
Because you know what?
At a blink of an eye.
You wonder the psychic toll of living in this time. How many of us are just brimming with that rage?
Right.
And trying to keep it down. We're negotiating how much of the news we consume, like that's going to make us crazy, and homicidal.
Right.
And I will think, if something happens to my children, I don't know what is going to be my breaking point.
Right. Right.
And I don't know. So, I'm always aware that at any moment, all of this capital I'm building for the future.
Right.
Is something going to happen that's going to undermine all of it.
Everything.
And that, I think, is where we live right now.
Right.
Just at that cusp all the time.
But it's not unlike your mother's time. Not unlike your grandmother's
Absolutely.
time, where there were effects in the world that could change your entire family dynamic. Like we had the safety of North Nashville, but you have to go to South Nashville, right? And same with your grandmother of, I don't want the outside agitators because I have to live here. Mm-hmm. You don't have to live here. They don't have to live here, but I have to live here and I have to deal with those consequences. So it's the question, you as a teacher, right? Mm-hmm. So the question is one of those thought-provoking things that we navigate unconsciously, but you pack in a very unemotional way. You tell it and you describe it in such a way that I know what this is, even if it hasn't happened to me. And I know that I have to be prepared for it now, whatever my answer of it is. Mm-hmm. Like, you don't tell me what to think, but you also make me think about it. Awesome. Like, I have to. That's teacher you.
Well, I have to quickly say, just on this point, I tell a story about sitting with my aunt, and she was telling me about life in Hazelhurst, and she was talking about how my grandmother, her mother, she would go to, and it's a typical story, but I'm the granddaughter and I was enraged. Right. But she's telling a story about going to the local Wilsons, and having to wait behind white people to be served, having to sort of, and here's my amazing grandmother who there's just no room she entered that she did not own. Right. And so the image of her sitting meekly and waiting, again, filled me with immediate rage. Right. And I would say, we're going to Wilson's. Yeah. So we go to Wilson's, and I'm ready to I'm ready to avenge the past. Right. But meanwhile, it's 2000 and whatever. Right. And I go up to the counter like, I want my cheese, And the guy's like, okay, and he gets the cheese. And it's like, oh, all right. This is not 1940 in Hazelhurst. Right. So, but again, we care, and the kind of the term epigenetics, that we carry these histories. They've done all the studies of Holocaust, the descendants of Holocaust survivors, and how they will experience PTSD, right? Even though they were not there and they're a generation removed. But I've thought about that. Who's studying us, right? And validating it. The experience that we carry, our histories, and again, even you're right. These stories we don't know. I don't know the young men. Right. But my God, we know them. Right. And we know how close we are to that experience. We've got it in our family somewhere. Somewhere there's that story. Right. And we are carrying the trauma. Yeah. And trying to live in the world and build something new and believe in the world at the same time. Right how the world is and right how the world should be. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We'll let you. All right. So I'm going to your wonderful insights. Here's the kind of cornerstone, the essay Black as a Body. Black history. My brown daughters became black when they were 6 years old. They were watching television one day in February, Black History Month. A commercial came on. It was more like a 30-second history lesson, a commemoration of a pilot, a poet, or a politician, a first Black, as a writer I know calls them being the racial pioneers, the inaugural Negroes, the foremost African Americans to break through racial barriers in their chosen fields. By breakthrough, I mean, of course, secure the regard of white people. See, we're Black, Julia said to Isabella. No, we're brown, Isabella responded. Yeah, but they call it Black, Julia explained. Despite my efforts to shield them, my daughters had somehow gotten wise to the absurd and illogical nature of American racial identity. Blackness, Julia had figured out, had nothing to do with actual skin color. Blackness, she had come to understand, was an external identity, external to her anyway. Race was something other people identified, something they said but not necessarily saw. Blackness, she had intuited, was a social category, not a color, but a condition. And like it or not, it was time, she was informing her sister, to get with the proverbial program. In spite of me, but also because of me, my brown daughters were becoming Black. My heart sank. It was not Blackness per se that caused my heart to sink. I enjoy being Black. But it took me a long time to get here, to this place of racial pleasure. My earliest experiences of Blackness were defined by an unpleasant and uncomfortable hypervigilance. Being Black meant that you had to be constantly aware, that you could never really be at ease. Early on, I got wise to the fact that being Black in a white place meant that the world was not a safe place, not for you. In my family, race was not a construction or a theory or an outdated consequence of history, but the active, living foundation of our reality. Race determined the contours of every choice we made. Every mundane public act we performed was a project with a name. When we moved into our house, it was called integration. When my older brother and I entered the public school system, it was called desegregation. The split between Black and white was not metaphorical. Railroad tracks divided Black and white Nashville. On the white side of town, South Nashville, we played a role in a grand project of enormous proportions. We lived in South Nashville, but in North Nashville, we could be Black in a way that was not possible in any other part of the city. In North Nashville, no one white was watching. We could relax. We were free. North Nashville was where my father practiced medicine and where we attended events at Fisk University, my parents' alma mater, and one of this country's oldest HBCUs. North Nashville was where we attended church in a small chapel that was established for the faculty and students of Meharry Medical College, from which both of my parents received their graduate degrees. Among the parishioners in the chapel were men and women I called aunt and uncle, even though we had no biological relationship. We shared something bigger and more profound than blood, history. Inside the church, we celebrated our belief in God and a common pride in how we all made it over and broke through. We were a community, a Black community, built in spite and because of racism. Because if it had not been for white supremacy, schools like Fisk and Meharry might never have existed. But my daughters were not born under the shadow of this history. They are Black by ideology and affinity, but not by blood. When they were 12 months old, they assumed dual citizenship in both America and African America. Should I continue?
Yeah.
Once when we were out of town visiting John's extended family, I told them the Black History Month story. I could see that the story unsettled them. I tried to explain my reasons for having wanted to protect my daughters from the language of race, but my explanations seemed only to make them more impatient. Don't you want them to know their history? John's cousin asked. I knew what she meant. She meant American slavery, segregation, and the civil rights movement. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, and Rosa Parks, Martin, Malcolm, and other first Blacks. February stories, which as American stories, belong to her, this white American woman, more than they do to my daughters. I am an African who lives in America, Isabella explained one day. She was recounting a conversation she had had with a third grade classmate. The African Children's Choir had come to Burlington, and the class had taken a field trip to see them perform. Later that day, Isabella's classmate, in an attempt to identify the difference she perceived between Isabella and the children on stage, had referred to Isabella as an African American. Isabella corrected her. While the law may state that I am an American, I am African. When I came to this country, she continued, astonishment made it difficult for me to continue paying attention. That my daughter had such a fine sense of her place in the world I had not known. Her implicit assessment of my role as essentially a porter in the stage of her life journey felt wholly appropriate. My daughters and I flipped through picture books of 12th century Ethiopian underground churches carved out of rock. I show them websites that feature both centuries-old drawings and modern photographs of Ethiopian kings and queens. Yours is the only African country to fight off the colonizer, I remind them often. Every mother thinks her daughters look like angels, but my daughters do resemble the doe-eyed, haloed brown cherubs that dominate Ethiopian Orthodox Christian iconography. Why did white people make black people slaves? Isabella asked one February afternoon. There's been slavery all over the world, I told her, even in Ethiopia. I'm proud that my daughters were born in a world where not only slaves, but also angels and aristocrats look like them.
So I will give you to your audience. Do you all have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm wondering, given what you said about your daughters having such different perspectives, I know they're 13, so you might not get this, but do you ever get to hear them talk to each other and like what they say to each other about these issues?
Well, what they mostly say to each other is, "Morning, idiot."
Yeah.
And I'm like, please stop fighting. Why are you so dramatic? That's a great question. We have separate conversations about it. What's interesting is that my daughters, like every kid with an iPhone, they consume the news. They will tell me about climate change, and I'm like, where did you hear that? Oh,
Right.
I'm watching this clip from CNN. And so they have formed, their ideas around race. I have to tell the story. I've told a lot of stories. C-SPAN has come to a couple of readings.
Yes.
Forget that they're here, but C-SPAN is not here. One day my daughter, again, the question of what to share and how I want them to form their own opinions, about things and honor their opinions and their trajectory, right? They will come to their own conclusions. God knows I have evolved a lot in my thinking about everything, including race and gender and everything.
Right.
So, but one day we were in the car, and John and I, my husband, not surprisingly, we talk about race a lot. So we're talking about something had happened, some horror, among many. And I thought the girls were sleeping. And this is back when I remember they were in car seats. So they were, 3, 4. And I was saying something, and Julia, I thought she goes, I hate white people. And I said, Julia. And she said, oh, just the ones I don't know. And John said, we're raising Julia X. So I will tease her about this. And, I've watched her, their friends, growing up. She had a couple friends over not long ago, and I heard her say, "You are the embodiment of white privilege today."
Whoa!
Again, the kids just take the note from Julia. And I thought, I didn't have a term like. I guess there were, when I was a kid.
No, we would have never.
I didn't have the vocabulary,
No.
and the sense of, I guess, of just that she's going to set the terms.
Yes.
She's going to set the terms,
Yes.
and so I mostly am just watching this. And again, I guess the best part of this whole book journey is when I've been at events that are local, and they can come with me, and just watching them and hearing them talk. And Isabella spoke very eloquently. They both have braids now, and at some point, someone said to ask about hair. So there's a woman in the audience, this white woman, who did this thing where she was talking about, she's an older woman, about how she had, after I given this whole, an hour of talking, she's like, well, I had this coworker, and I told her hair was beautiful, and I wanted to touch it, and she got mad, and, she's sort of throwing up her hands, like, they're black people, And I thought, oh my God, I can't. And again, I just was talking for an hour.
Right.
And so I just was tired. I said, Isabel, come here.
Handle this.
Handle this. And she was saying, look, it's a matter of common courtesy. You just don't
Right.
want to touch people's hair.
Right.
And some people, and I say no, and sometimes I say, and it's my prerogative.
Right.
And so I'm watching her, and later I was just like, oh. And Isabel said, she was just trying to relate. And,
Aw.
she's limited and she's old. So. And I thought, oh my God,
She's compassionate.
She's so generous, and I'm being all mean.
Right.
And, but I thought, okay, so yeah, this is great, and again, give her room to all of these experiences. But I think, they have that generosity, and that I love how they can talk back to these things so clearly, and I'm always encouraging that.
Yeah.
Again, I just want them to do it. I have their back, if anything happens, but. So I haven't watched them really communicate about. I would love to be a fly on the wall,
Right.
but I'm watching them themselves. And my job, I feel, is to equip them. I can't change the world,
Right.
but I can equip them with a sense of power and a sense of freedom with their mouths.
Yes.
And talking back to it and carving out their own space. I feel like that.
Well, they certainly have a handle on language. Like they can definitely do that. But and it's hard for students. And I'm a teacher, so it's hard for students to articulate themselves. So the fact that they can clearly express how they're feeling is way and above most people their age, right?
I don't want them. I don't know about anybody in the audience, but I think for me, silence was for so many years the choice I made, and it was not worth it.
Yeah.
But I was doing the best I could at the time.
Right.
And in some ways, my parents, my mother coming from, a segregated history, my father coming from a segregated history, they had no experience with that phenomenon, right, of being the only one in class. They had no experience. And for them, it was education. Just get, you're not in that classroom, these friends, you're able to get your grades so that you can continue and be a noble citizen.
Right.
But I do have that experience my daughters have. Of course, they are living very differently. But again, that's a choice. And maybe they'll teach their children something different. And maybe they'll, raise kids in a very different place. But right now, it's like, what I know did not work for me was silence and fear. Yeah. And so I'm raising warriors, is what I tell myself.
Brave girls.
Sometimes that's hard for mom.
Right. It definitely puts you in a position, right?
I'm not, raising the little obedient girls in their pinafores and teacups. I mean, they have language for me too. So, but it's about always wanting them to feel empowered as they move forward.
Yeah.
And to have a sense of themselves as, these beautiful brown girls who, regardless of what anyone says, they have stuff to contribute.
Yes.
And that's, in the book I talk about my close friend who's, my big sister, and certainly ahead of me on the journey. She's a black woman who actually born in Belize, but she's, and her kids are very light-skinned. Her husband is African-American. And she told me that she never once, when they were young, told them they were beautiful.
Oh.
Because she didn't want them to associate beauty with light skin.
Wow.
And she said that she realized in some ways it wasn't quite a mistake, but she understood the consequences when they were adults because they had no idea. So she was walking with her son and people were looking and she said that he had no idea.
Right.
But I told her, I tell my daughters they're beautiful every single day.
Right.
And yes, because of skin color. I mean, I want them to know.
Right.
And we watch, brown girls in the documentaries.
Right.
And I want them to know that because I feel like, again, brick by brick, I am building a fortress around them so that they'll take that out in the world, hopefully with them.
Right.
And maybe maybe mom says I'm beautiful is not going to mean a lot. But
it will.
You think?
Oh, of
it's
course.
Like indoctrination.
This woman here, when I walk in a room, I know how beautiful I am. Her eyes light up, her face lights up. So yes. Okay. And even if I'm feeling really bad and not so pretty, this one, I feel pretty.
Oh,
yes.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
I love
so
that.
they'll definitely glean that. And it's wonderful to have that type of confidence because, and this is one thing my father always put it, no one can ever tell you anything about yourself that you don't already know. And so if he told me how smart I was, and my mom always told me how pretty I was, no one could convince me of anything other than what my parents had told me. So
that's right. It's really, it's good. And it's good when they're just, the good one, like, mom, I know.
Yeah. I mean, I did that too. Yeah. Roll eyes, straighten your back up and
But because you know it
yeah.
so well,
Yes.
it's not a surprise
No.
to hear it.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And you can't say, "Oh,
Yeah.
I'm Mary's daughter. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
I'm beautiful. You can't tell me I'm not beautiful. My mama said I was beautiful." So
Yeah.
you have that, and
Yeah.
it's the battles that you won't ever see.
Yeah.
That they'll pull
Okay.
it out and say, "Yeah, no, you can't tell me that. My mama said no. Yeah, they'll love that. Any other questions for Emily? Yes, ma'am. And then we'll go.
Not to dwell on your daughters, but they're so interesting and so lovely. How do they feel about how they were portrayed in the book, and how has that been received by their immediate community as well?
I'll say, I love that question. I was on a panel, it's fortunate, another book, Danny McLean's We Live for the We. Have you heard about this book? She's a journalist, and I really loved it. So we both wrote about motherhood, and we brought different, a different tradition. She's a journalist, and I do this other thing. So, but I read her book, and I said on this panel, I said, I realized when I read your book how much I wrote this book to make my daughters kind of visible in their community. Again, I'm always watching, at school, something happened, I wonder what this is about.
Right.
And the book, I think I realized that, wow, I wanted to, write them into the community in some ways, and just say, look, my daughters look at them, they're complex human beings. And, I think I had that in mind and some back in my head. It's complicated writing about living people, and especially when they're your children or your family. And I wrote in the intro, and my husband was so funny because he's, I think, in almost every essay.
Right.
And he just, kind of never complained. But he did say to me at some point, I wrote something, he goes, I love this. I'm not in it. Like, it's so I said, okay, I'll leave you alone. But the girls write. I mean, they've grown up with me writing about them. And so they'll say, oh, here she goes. I mean, there have been some moments I wrote about, I'll say, let's say Julia says something, and I'll say, oh, can I use that? Or could you say it again?
Right.
Can I use this?
This is material.
God. And then very recently, they're old, a little more, I said to Julia, oh, can I use that thing you said? She goes, well, you have to give me some Takis and some Dijon. So now I make the little deals, But there are some things that
I'm bribing you.
Now, hey,
or payment.
payment.
The payment is what it is.
Pro quo.
Yes.
But they have been generous in tolerating it. I read to them every single story, to kind of, again, it was a little bit self-serving. Okay, if they grow up with these stories, they'll just think of them as just being out there.
Right, right.
And I've asked them, how does it feel? And what Julie said to me, I thought was brilliant. She said, well, they're stories about us. It's not us.
Oh.
So I thought that was great.
Very perceptive.
In some ways, there's no way that my mom can capture me on the page. I'm bigger than that.
Yeah.
But I think they understand,
good.
that these are stories that I believe have some usefulness, again, beyond just, I think they say something.
Almost anecdotal.
Yes. And the anecdote then is about, again, for a reader to come and say, hey, well,
that's good.
I thinking about my own experience, I disagree or I agree. And so I like to think that I'm walking that line. But, as I get older, I mean, it's not the same thing to be written about some story when you were 4. Now, they're going through, there's, no way.
Right.
And there are a couple of moments in the story about called Motherland, being in Ethiopia. We were taking them back, and there's a profound moment where, here they were, these kids, they'd never been in a car before, and we were riding on this really rocky terrain.
Right.
And so there were, bodily fluids that came out. They also didn't have, we were so naive, but talking to our American Ethiopia adoption agents, they were just kind of, but these 2 white women were like, oh, there'll be diapers there you can buy. And we were foolish enough to believe it.
Right.
We are, in like the 15th century. And,
right.
And there are no bodegas.
Right. You run to the corner store, CVS.
So they had like little cloth diapers, They're like little princesses who people just carrying around all the time. So anyway, there was no padding between me, our hands and their, So one daughter, they vomited all over us, and then of course, and so there was some other products. And so I had it originally in the essay, because I thought to myself, this is sort of our pseudo birth experience,
Right.
But as I got older, Isabel said, well, I don't really want, to be pooping in this essay. And I said, I get it. And Julie was like, I'll do it. I'll take one for the team. And I said, you know what? I think when you get to be like 16, it's time for the point. You're not going to want.
Right.
I think we get the point across.
Right.
with the
Right. Right.
enough.
Right.
So those kind of things, you know, thinking about the future and what that would be like.
And it's interesting because I interviewed Nathan McCall some years ago with Makes Me Want to Holler, and his son was a child when he was writing about him in the book, but we were at Hampton together when the book came out. And so just that, the difference of time, right? And so it's an innocent story of a 2-year-old at that moment. It really wasn't about him as much as it was about the parents' relationship. But he was 19 years old, and we're all reading the story about his parents and him being 2. And so that is something to have some insight about.
Yes.
This story is going to live with you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Isn't it right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I always think, well, this is our book. I told the girls, you know, this is really these stories, you know, you
It really
made them.
is. Right.
But also, I think, you know, I guess I'm drawn to that line. You know, I can't help it. You know, this line between self and other, and the line. You know, what stories belong to you?
Right.
What stories belong to someone
Right.
else? You know, where is that
And
line?
you talk about that because you graciously gave your husband a space for his story of your accident, of the trauma
Yeah,
that
that's
happened.
right.
So
Yeah.
the waves, the ripples that also get affected by a story.
That's right.
I don't think we think about, as a writer, I don't think about that a lot either. I feel like it happened with me.
Yeah.
I own this story. I get to write this story, but there are other people and characters that will be affected by it, whether I name them
Right,
or
exactly.
not.
Just gonna, and you know, the story of my stabbing. You know, again, my daughters. You know, it belongs to them in some way. I'm their mother,
Yeah.
and this thing happened to their mother.
Yeah.
And so
And you keep having effects from it.
to go
So-
right, exactly. You
Yeah.
know, and the experience of being the first time I had to when they were alive or with us. You know, I went to the hospital. They were 2 years old, and then now when I just went back, I mean, this is different being 12 and saying to your mother, "Are you going to be home when I get back?"
Right.
And I said, I am going to do my damnedest.
Right.
You know,
Right.
But you know that is their own. And I always tell them, if I have to go to the therapist's office and account for having written about you, I will pay I will.
I'm prepared
pay the
for that.
price.
Yeah.
I'm not going to rationalize this away. You know, I've met some writers who feel like anything they've ever heard belongs to them.
Yeah.
What I learned over the course of this book, and what I've learned, of course, in life, it's about relationships.
Yeah.
You know, and so I've certainly made decisions not to represent people in a certain way. But there are other people who, you know, I'm representing. The woman, I'll say what this other thing, you know, the story about going, I'm sorry? Oh, the story about going to Ethiopia or becoming adoptive parents begins with getting a phone call from the woman who was our liaison in Vermont, and she said, "We got a pair of twins. You want them?" So so this is something that made my daughters laugh. I mean, you know, when they were 5, but you know, 13, emotions running high, and my daughter Julia started crying when she had read it to her, you know, maybe a year ago or just to, you know, kind of read through the essays, and she said, that's not fair. You know, you don't do that to kids. You don't talk about kids that way. And I think it was an earlier draft of the essay, and I was like, okay, now she's going to get what's coming to her. Because I always feel when I write an essay, my job is to treat the people with compassion and recognize everybody's humanity. But I thought, okay, I'm going to use my poison pen now. I mean, everything is true, but there actually was nothing really redeemable about this person except that she made it possible for us to become a family.
Right.
But I had not anticipated that response from her. And I thought, okay, so I still believe in the story, but I'm going to make sure that it's clear that this person was despicable.
And was held accountable.
And hold her accountable with my pen. And, you know, let that be real, because it did hurt my daughter.
Right.
So, you know, I guess it's an ongoing negotiation and question, you know, but they come first, and their sense of integrity comes first. And so if I were ever to write something that they just hated, I mean, that just wouldn't make it to the page. It's not worth it.
Yeah, the relationship versus the payout.
Right. And as they're becoming adults, you know, they need to have that.
Yeah. You had a question?
I did. So you were saying when you were in Old Navy, your daughter had that experience and you never wanted her to question that what she felt was real. And so there's a lot of dead Black people on the other side of that, because the person that they died at the hands of did not question that what they felt, the threat or whatever it was real.
That's right.
How do you reconcile that,
That's
especially
right.
as someone who
Yeah.
is standing in front of malleable minds
That's very
all the
true.
time?
That's true. Yes. Well, I think there's that distinction between honoring your experience, right, and saying, I'm correct, like my instincts are correct, and then how you proceed from that, you know? So, we still talk about, we've done, like many parents, like the drills about how to talk to the police, you know? But I guess my conviction is that I never want them to feel that they did something wrong. And, but I must say, what was the most heartbreaking part of that story for me was my daughter saying, well, the worst part was that there were 3 people ahead of me in line. So what she meant was she had to sit with that and let that encounter sit there. And of course, there's nobody else Black in the store. And that is often the hardest thing, right? It's like, no one else is really witnessing this for you,
Right.
And also she made a point of saying, I was very polite to the salespeople. And I thought, there's that respectability policy. She wanted everyone to know that she was a good kid.
Right.
And I hated that part of it.
Right.
That she knew that was important.
The best response for her in that moment.
Because she understood that other people might wonder if it was her fault in some way, she'd done anything. So my job, I felt, was to fortify her interior so that she would never say, oh, it's because I was, wearing this, or I was, too Black in some way, or, that might be the other person's perception, right? It might be because your skin is darker than Olivia's, what she thought, but it's not true. I don't want her ever in her mind, body say, there's something wrong with me, being a kid in the
Right.
line, But as opposed to how to respond, I actually mentioned this to an older Black woman friend who's the thing she's told her kids, it's okay to say, because we still want them to be respectful to adults and all that stuff. So she was saying what she told her kids is, if they were to encounter something like that, to say, I feel you're making me feel unsafe. To kind of almost anticipate the thing.
Right.
And to say, you're not my mother. For her that was a response to have.
Right.
And I haven't talked that through with my daughters yet,
Right.
but in that case, I think she conducted herself really well. She said to the woman, I wasn't the one spraying it, and so the woman kind of huffed and puffed.
Right.
And she just carried herself with dignity. As opposed, I think the idea of this thing escalating. Haven't had that conversation with her yet. They're still 13, but they're with me most of the time. It was sort of extraordinary for her to be alone. And in fact, I thought the mom was going to be there. But I guess the thing I was really, what I was suggesting, her friend being biracial, but I think of her as Black, her mom, I realized at that point, Isabel called me because she couldn't talk to that mom. She didn't perceive her as somebody who would understand. So that was something I learned in that moment, like, okay, not that my kid's not safe with this mom,
Right.
but it was just something to remember.
Right.
And when they are out, I've done the job of educating the white adults about being hypervigilant. When my kid's out with you, you need to be watching.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way I can let them be with the So they have a pretty limited circle in terms of the adults who will be with them. But it was an unusual encounter in that I didn't know this mom. She's very young, and it was a situation. I don't know. I don't want to speculate, but she doesn't have a sense of herself, I think, as being the mother of a Black child. And I learned it in that moment when the call Isabella that she had to call me to get some
Comfort.
understanding of what was happening. So as their lives become more independent, it's going to be a different set of conversations. But right now, as I said, they're with me a lot of the time, so I can kind of shape what happens to them, and I'm there with my glare, and I'm there with my game face.
Right.
And
It's
so
tricky.
far it's working.
It's tricky. It is
Very
a tricky
tricky.
line to navigate, and you
Yeah.
don't want. It would be wonderful to be free and to always be a
Wonderful
child,
to be free.
and just be able to play and not have to think about consequences. But we do know that there are consequences, sharp
Right.
consequences. When my nephew was younger, he would go into stores with his friends, and I was like, "You always get a receipt. You always put the stuff in a bag. You don't get to put things in your pocket. You don't get to." And he's looking at me, but they bought gum and put it. No. You get a receipt.
Yeah.
You put it in your pocket, and it's heartbreaking because I've made him conscious of something that otherwise he was just having fun with his friends and hanging out. And so now I'm the downer auntie, like, duh, auntie, everybody isn't. Yes, because the moment I don't tell you, you'll encounter them. And then the consequence of that can either be nothing or everything.
Yeah.
So I have to do this. And the world is changing, and I think people are becoming more open and more perceptive to just differences. But in that wonderful way that they are being perceptive of differences, it's also a demonizing force of differences that's happening. And so I don't know if it's a good or a bad, but what I admire about your parenting is the ability for them to grow into themselves. You certainly give them boundaries in the book, but they have such an experiential way of growing up. And it's not a stop touching, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But they get to experience things and kind of digest it for themselves, even if it's outside of your own personal experience, which I think takes a lot of courage to not want to make your child be a certain way, make you be this, you're going to make your... So I think as a parenting skill, it's something that came through really well in your book about how you just let them be. But you do it with your students too, which is, it has to be inherent to who you are as a person.
Well, I will say that one thing I've been trying out, and I'd love to hear people's responses to this.
Okay.
But watching the whole Me Too thing kind of unfold, and how at least on the public stage, you do this and somebody loses their job, right?
Right.
And a lot of the accuser, what we hear about are white women, and we hear about these, for the most part, like Garrison Keillor and others. And so I thought, well, the kind of popular discourse is like, never question these women.
Right.
So, so here's something that happened after the Old Navy story. So I've told it a lot of times. And my husband's friend who God, bless his soul heart, but he irritates me. So he's white, and I was telling him the story, and his response was, and he was trying to be thoughtful. He said, well, what about this woman? What would we say to her? Like, how could she be kind of saved? And I was just like, what? Like, you hear the story, and the person you care about is this woman? And I told my husband later, I said, you know what? Our kids can never be alone with Stan. Because if he's going to turn around and say, let me save your soul, it's not going to work.
Right.
So, but I needed time to really think. And I said, you know what? What would Stan say if he told a story like that, and some random man went up to his daughters and said, hey, you look pretty cute in that top. Got a little too close. How would he feel if I said, well, let's talk to this man and help him?
Right.
But so, it's like, that's what I have to say to these people to make them understand, again, how, and so that's the kind of thing, like, thinking.
You're very versed in reverse. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're very versed in how to switch it and turn it and make, because you do, because I don't have that. Like, I'm not equipped with the quick quips. Like, I don't have that. I'm mad and I get emotional. I do the regular stuff. I'll get the teary-eyed thing, and then I do have the gift of language. So I'll pull out some SAT words on you to make you feel what I'm feeling. Yeah, I can get you with some 4 syllables vocabulary, but I don't have that in that moment. But you don't know how this sounds. So let me say it this way, so you can hear exactly what you just said. I wish I had that skill, because I think people get it when you personalize it for them and put it from their perspective. This is what you just said to be true. Now, if I flip it this way, is it still true? Right. And if it's not still true this way, then it's not universal. So we're going to let this go.
Well, to be fair, I live in Vermont, and there are a lot of white people to manage. And I told my daughter, I got to manage white people. And for instance, we were in, talking to, one daughter's having trouble with math. And again, kind of wondering, like, what is this about? That I'm not getting the attention or feedback from the teachers that I need. Right. And, so going to meet with the teacher, and I finally just had it. I'd been, nice and everything. And I went in and I said, look, this can't happen, this can't happen. And I said, you know what? Okay, look, this is me on 10. So then I later told the daughter, I said, that's me on 6.
Right.
Because 10 is with my back.
Right.
And I said, and I told Isabella, I said, look, see, this is how you have to sometimes I played nice for a long time.
Right.
And I'm not getting the results I want.
Right.
So now I might get the reputation as the angry black mother.
Right, I have to be
but
a crazy
be it.
mama.
That's my, plan B. But you know what? I'm getting the results I need for you. But
Right.
you see how I did that to kind of say, unfortunately, we have to manage our emotions because if I say anything and I'm the angry, that's just
Right.
like I just walk into this
And
spot.
it discounts what you have to say when they
Yeah.
categorize
But
you as the
sometimes-
angry black woman.
Fear is a good motivator. And so sometimes, people, but so I was trying to instruct my daughter, see how,
Right.
this is carefully cultivated. And, weighing the options here.
Right.
But, trying to also say, because she was angry, and I said, we have to, I know you're angry.
Right.
But you've got to use your words.
Right.
And you are 13.
Right.
And no adult wants to be corrected by a child.
Right.
Anyways.
Right.
But see how I'm doing this? Because it's about what do you need
Right.
and how to manage a situation
Right.
to manipulate.
Right.
But it's just always the kind
Right.
of modeling, but
Right.
always the awareness.
Right.
This is a potential here.
Right. I have a plan B.
Yes.
Yes. Is there any other? Yes, sir.
This has really been great. I happen to know your father. We worked together at Mahara.
Wow.
You know my brother. But you went to the same church.
Satcher.
Satchel.
So great to see you, Dr. Satcher. Yeah.
But it's really been great. I really
Thank you.
enjoyed. You're a comedian, no?
Laughing to keep from crying. Is
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Satcher, for coming. We appreciate it. Well, one second, Ms. Doris. There's a hand behind you, and then Ms. Doris. Yes, ma'am.
So you were saying you put together the essays in hopes that they would offer lessons for others. Were there any surprising lessons or anything of significant impact to you after you wrote it?
Yes, thank you. Harper's Magazine published an excerpt of an essay called People Like Me, which is the last essay in the book, which is about living black in Vermont. And, I think it's a pretty sober essay, where I talk about, wanting to believe in a certain kind of way of thinking about Vermont, but there's a reality also to Vermont. And coming to a place where just sort of saying, well, this is where I am right now. And I came out, I'm proud of the essay, but I thought, I wonder how people in Vermont are going to respond to this.
Right.
And, there's just like the hate mail that a person gets if you're color and dare open your mouth, public.
Right.
I got so many emails from people saying, please stay.
Really?
Yeah. I was like, wow. I mean, also, it's okay, you didn't
I'm
do
not
it,
packing.
and it's just an essay,
Right,
really.
right.
But I heard from people saying, that they never thought about it, which is what it is,
Right.
And to be honest, it's Pride Month, and I have not gone to any rallies, so I do have some understanding
Right,
of that. Like,
right,
if it doesn't
right.
affect you personally,
It's just existing.
you
Yes.
just don't even think about it.
Right.
So that was really, and I said, I never knew that expressing my ambivalence about being here would make me feel so much belonging to this place.
Wow.
Because people were just like, how can I help? What can I do? I want to be part of this. And I also really thought of this book in some ways as a book that women would buy, and in some crude way, that's publishing across the board.
They help you think that way.
And
They do.
Black women are the biggest book buyers of any demographic. But in general, women buy books. So
Right.
I thought, okay, well, that's okay, But I've had emails from men who said to me, these are my stories.
Wow.
This is my grandmother. And more than once,
Wow.
I got an email almost literally saying, I'm an old white man, a poor white man lives in the South, and these stories are my stories, and this is
Wow.
my South and my grandmother. And, part of the pleasure of me, I guess in everything I've done writing-wise, I love making connections with people that you would never otherwise make.
Right.
And just feeling like we do share a common humanity, don't we?
But that's how books work. Like it's the unintended connections, because if the words aren't universal, it doesn't get published.
Yeah, that's really true.
But when they are universal, they get published and shared and expressed, and you tell people about it. It's like, oh, you got to read this book, and so yeah.
Also, I must say another pleasurable thing that's happened is hearing from kids who are adopted.
Oh,
I've heard from several of them writing me and saying that they've used the essays to talk with their adoptive parents.
Right.
And share things they hadn't been able to.
Right.
And I can't tell you what that has meant to me, just to say, oh, wow.
I have friends who have adopted that I'm like, you need to, if you don't read anything but this chapter,
Yeah.
because there is an unspoken, that happens in communities about adoption. And I think you navigated extraordinarily well. And I think people need an advocate to help them feel okay about how they want to navigate the world. So,
Yes, yes.
yeah, I think that's good. Hi, Ms. Torres.
I just wanted one more quote from your grandmother. Don't want to check that was a good one.
Well, I talked about my grandmother. You know, we went to a church service with her, and I remember, just receiving, going to church, and everyone, just the room lit up when she came in the room, and she just went down the aisle, and just had, I thought, the blessing of her wit. And I remember she said, to one of the church members, like, "You look as sharp as a rat's tail on a frosty morning." Down, everyone, you could tell it was so, it was like she was giving money away.
Right.
And it was really,
Right.
and that's who she was. I mean, she just was that person, People would just come to her porch, and it wasn't just even what she said, but it was just the way, I just think so much of my work is just trying to approximate that. And, she was a poet.
Okay.
And something that I learned, I told a whole story about, and, at some point I had one of the people in the editorial of the Caucasian variety, and also Northern, was like, "Oh, the story about my grandmother, can you tell it in a lively way in the conversation?" And I was like, "Sit down and listen to my grandmother."
Right.
And, so
Right.
I tell the story, I like,
Right.
the pace, I try to keep it slow.
Right.
It's just like,
Right.
but, she wanted to live a life that would take her outside of Hazelhurst. And she married my grandfather, who was supposed to have a job in the railroad. And the job fell through, and then she was stuck in Hazelhurst. So the whole essay and her life was trying to make a house. She wanted to, because her husband's family didn't approve of her family, so she wanted to live. And it's just, to me, this epic story of a woman living in she couldn't get a mortgage without her husband's approval. And they had a, shall we say, passionate relationship. It was full of a lot of arguing. And I always think Dr. Satcher, my parent, had very peaceful. I think my mother was just, I'm not going to have that.
Right.
Don't we make again these decisions?
Right.
But she wrote her poetry, and to me, the most tragic moment that I wanted to honor, when she got married to my grandfather, who her mother, who was very pious and very righteous, disapproved of, because my grandfather was a colorful character. She was so angry because she ran off to get married that she burned all of her poetry. Right? And so, but she came later in life, she wrote again, and she published, like in kind of church journals, religious journals, wrote about, And I thought, wow, I'm able to sit here today because of very complicated and difficult choices that she made to free herself, but also because, she was an artist. And I have the freedom to write, and no one is going to burn my work.
No.
I could get a house on my own without my husband,
Right.
all the small, I took
Right.
for granted.
Right.
When I got married, I remember when I got married, Dad was so concerned about us getting our license. He had a bat too, and he told my mother, "I'm going to come down with them." My mother's like, and I didn't even consider it for a second that we could be denied.
Right.
But see, that was his right.
Right. That's their story, and that's their true experience.
That's right. And
Yeah.
they went through all of that so that I wouldn't even have to think about it.
Right. Right.
But that was his fear, that we would be, at best humiliated, and
Right.
at worst something else would happen to us.
Right.
But just a reminder, right? The continuity.
Right.
What Mary Brock called the changing same.
Yeah.
Way the stories continue to be played out, but
Yeah.
they're different too.
Yeah, and you draw that line because even talking about your grandmother being a poet and how you grew up with books and how they were always around and how you packed books to go back to your grandmother's house and no one bothered you. You got to read and go to church and then read and come back and do, and that lineage is something that you're gifting to your students as well as to your kids. So, Miss Bernard. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
want to make a comment because I know 3 people that your dad delivered. One is an author, and she is in Rome today. So if you're going to Rome,
Italy, yes.
Yeah.
Christina, I'll have to give you her
Okay, please
information.
do.
Yeah,
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay,
So,
yeah.
growing up in Nashville, there weren't very many OBGYNs in our communities,
That's right.
right? So, who was mine?
Oh,
Dr.
no, you came one hospital.
No, but I'm saying when I went to Nashville, it was
Oh, Cable was your
Dr. Capel
Dr.
was
Capel.
mine. And so it was one of those things where everybody said, oh, Dr. Capel was my doctor. And then Wanda, who also went to Hampton, no, Dr. Bernard was mine. And then we run to Hampton and run into Warren. So it's just, that's how small Nashville was at that time. But this has been a wonderful,
Wait, I have
wonderful experience. Oh, we still have
Somebody's
questions.
not a question, but
Yes,
a
ma'am.
comment also. In regards to your grandmother's thing, that's one reason I'll probably get the book to get some more quotes. But also, the way that you're saying it, it seems like it applies to, or it could be to me or anyone else that's in this room.
Yes.
Things that have happened to us that we know about, and most of us that you're talking about, we know about, we didn't express it the way that you did, so it kind of brings it up into where we can see it.
Yes.
And I took, I recorded my dad's, I asked the history and I recorded
wow.
all his things, so now I can have a way that I can put it on paper
Yes.
to get it done. And later on, we took a video, so, and asking about the history. So I'm gonna try to copy you.
You should. She gives you a wonderful roadmap. You really can, especially when she talks about going to
And plus
Mississippi.
I have,
Yes.
I'll be going to a book club. So this is gonna be one of the books I'm gonna recommend.
Yay.
And then you, by Skype or Zoom or coming down, or however you're gonna do it.
I will come back, in excuse. I'll come back, I'd love to.
So that's what I'm gonna do.
Yes.
And how I
Thank
can
you.
connect with you and try to
Oh, we will.
get it done.
Yes.
I think
definitely.
that's so, I love that I wish I had taken more recordings. I wish I had
Yeah.
with my dad and just to ask what their lives were like.
And to hear him, the way he expressed it, you can go back in time with him.
Right.
Exactly.
The way that he said it.
Right.
And I said, I understand now why you got the hell out of Georgia.
Right.
That's right.
And we do have a book club here. This is
Oh.
Miss Doris and her 4 members, so that you are the
Yeah.
book selection.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored. Thank you so much.
And I have it back too.
Yeah.
So you'll be coming often.
Right.
Yes. Okay, let's do it. We'll do it.
So you'll come back for another
Of
one of the
course.
words?
I would be honored to. Thank you.
So if you would like to purchase a book, or if you already have a copy of the book, she'll be signing. They're $27, and they're up front in the gift shop, and then you can come back and have them
Oh,
signed.
beautiful. Thank you so much. Okay, let's do it. So,
Yes. Oh, because Warren. Yes.
Yeah,
Because we got to make him feel bad.
yeah, I didn't even